Does anybody here not already know Jacob? Raise your hands. You do? Jacob is I've known him for about 15 years. He's a former Cordev employee. Now he's back with Cordev. He's a great guy. He's been super involved in the QASIG for all these years. He's moderated panel discussions. He's presented, and he's helped find people. But the most important thing you need to know is he's an all-around great guy. So when you get a chance, talk to him later. So I'm going to leave everything else to you.
Cheers. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. Really pleased with the turnout. I just thought that this is kind of a hopefully interesting topic that I don't see get talked about too many times. So I just thought I'd kind of throw my hat in the ring and give it a shot. But before I do, I'm actually going to start with a teaser, a preview for the May QASIG. It's tentatively May, but it should be May, hopefully when this lands. I'm actually going to come back again. And I've got some really, really cool, interesting stuff that I'm working on that I'd like to talk to you guys about. Stochastic world, stochastic processes are randomly determined processes. And so this is the world of quantum computing. So you guys already know that artificial intelligence, machine learning, that stuff has really begun to take off. But now there's actual quantum computing and quantum annealing. And it's like a game changer. This really changes a lot about the roles that testers play and the nature of testing and the tools. Hope you guys don't mind. And so it's really cool stuff. I've been involved in it for several months now, and so I can't wait to tell you guys about it, but the time's not now. So I hope to see your lovely smiling faces when the weather gets better in May. So like Joe said, I was at Cordev for over 8 years, and I left and did some managing things a couple of different places, and just wanted to bounce off of those a little bit here before we get into the main topic, which is about reporting on quality, and just trying to manage up, I guess, is one of the things that people said. But I wanted to share my time at Smart because it was a full stack organization. We made the hardware and we developed the platform and operating system as well. And what was really unique about that, well, maybe I shouldn't say unique, but really interesting and challenging was every layer of the product comes with these new challenges and constraints that, I'm like a software guy. I imagine a lot of us are primarily coming from software and software testing and software quality assurance. But, the quality measures that were necessary in the hardware, for example, just ended up being a little bit different, and it was such a eye-opener for me. For example, and some of you guys may know this, with a lot of hardware products that are coming out, you're in development for a certain cycle, just like anything else that you're productizing. And the thing that's going to make it obsolete, you're working on that as well at the same time. Right? So these things are ultimately going to be staggered, and the commoditization and the competition in the hardware world have become so intense. I mean, good God, I don't know how many of you guys already have 4K TVs, but you can get them for like under $1,000 now, right? I mean, it's insane. And so the hardware itself is absolutely commoditized. You can't make money on that, and yet you can't exit the game, like that's just a prerequisite just to be able to play, so to speak, if you're going to be selling stuff like this. And so it really made some interesting dynamics when it came to how to manage quality and how to do testing and everything, because these hardware guys, I was kind of frustrated with them at times. It felt like they were just kind of like, it's kind of good. Oh, I see some are there hardware people in the room?
I would never admit to that.
But it felt like they were just kind of like, just good enough. They plan it out really well, really robust planning. They kind of do that, and they might have stumbled across a couple other stuff. But they don't have this, like, oh, I got to introduce these guys to James and John Bach. They got to know about exploratory testing and everything. Because hardware is much more immutable. Like if you don't find that problem in time, like that's not going to change, right? We're just going to have to live with it. And so that seemed to be
the role of software is to fix the hardware problem.
Right, isn't it?
That's what we found. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, we're like the Finnish carpenters, right? It's the same thing. Absolutely.
As in the Macs.
And so, but what I eventually was coming to realize is they're working within this window. If you can't achieve the success within this window, it reaches this point. It's not even diminishing returns. It's like now we're really actually losing money on this and losing. And so they would just a couple of times. If you can't get it right, and if there's schedule delays early on, it's such a bad thing for hardware, and they've already got the next generation coming along, and they just cancel it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned to kind of have a little bit more empathy and understanding that, okay, yeah, hardware is different. It's different in ways that a little bit more than I realized. I also, I was a BSP engineer, which is called Board Support Package, which was a very, very interesting time. It sent me to Wuhan a couple of times. I'm not sick.
Have you been there lately?
Yeah, I've not been there lately. I've been there in like 2 or 3 years. But I know, like, nobody heard about Wuhan, right? Did anybody hear about Wuhan?
Nope.
Before
No.
this week? Yeah, it's like, I went down like, Wuhan, where the hell is this place? It's only like 11 million people, it's only like the size of LA. It's like the 22nd largest city in China, but that would be huge here. Like, nobody'd heard of Wuhan. And so, so there's manufacturing hardware. But once we had released, even after we went to production and we were having new software releases at Smart, we would make a new build that would be, burned in on the devices when they're getting manufactured. And so I had this new set of customers that I never actually even realized that we're going to be a part of this as well, which is the manufacturing team. There's manufacturing hardware and manufacturing software. It's actually, who would have thunk of it? Very robust, complex situation going on over there. And so I work with those teams and help to scope out, all the quality control and everything. And it was really challenging, but I did want to touch on the BSP as well, because that is kind of the predicate that rolls into this whole thing about reporting up, because actually I'm drawing on a lot of my prior experience over the past 5 years. I was doing test management at Smart, and Scrum Master work, really, I think is kind of, depends on your methodology, blah, blah, blah. But that's pretty much where we're at. And so the BSP, the Board Support Package, this is like the first layer of the software that actually runs on the hardware itself. And so there's very few engineers that are involved and capable of this kind of stuff. Smart actually brought in this lady, and I started right before she did, onboarded for a couple of weeks, and my boss told me, he was like, we just kind of started with this warning. He was like, I'm bringing in so-and-so. I was like, oh, well, I don't know who that is. And he's like, well, she's a legend. Every single person who's ever worked with her says she's the best that has ever been and the best that ever will be, and they will never work with her again. And it turned out to be like so true. Like, she was just so antagonizing and frustrating, and part of the reason why is because she was always right. And so she was definitely knew her stuff. But down at that level, I think like a lot of people are just, that's just kind of how they are.
Could she teach?
Cranky.
Could
she teach?
Or does she want to? It's kind of the same question.
I think you might not want to be the pupil. Probably where she's at. She's retired now at this point, and so I developed a fantastic relationship with her, actually. I'm one of the few who somehow I passed the test that she had enough respect for me. That was the right process. So that was my time at Smart, and most of that is just kind of saying, hey, here's some of this stuff, but a lot of you guys may not really know much better or care too much about, but it was interesting stuff. And I'm going to pull from that a little bit more as I get into our main topic, which is reporting up on quality. Like I said, I just don't see too many people talking about this stuff. And so before I jumped in it, I was going to talk about this question, but even before I get to that question, I did kind of want to do a little bit of a poll around the room and just kind of find out, like, how many people are at leadership or have been in leadership roles where you've been reporting up on things. Okay, so about half the room or so. And then, so how many people would you say that you're more individual contributor level? And usually when people multiple levels above you are getting informed on what's going on, it's not coming from your mouth, but from some other lead role or something there. Okay, so a little bit about half and half. I'm really glad to have a good mix, and that way you guys can keep me honest. So when I'm saying this stuff, you guys can look around and see totally like bullshitting us. Or, okay, so, and then I'm just going to toss it up and kind of a quiz. Like, what do you guys typically think? What do leaders want? How can you put that in a nutshell? What would you guys? How would you answer that?
That depends upon the leader.
Sure.
Some of them want to hear only good news. Some of them want to know exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, miss.
They want to know what they can fix quickly so things can just move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Excellent.
That's true. I would say, okay, I'm talking about an ideal leader then, that would want good, detailed, trustworthy, actionable information.
Yeah.
You guys are all over my slides. Oh, God, sheepishly showing you guys my big reveals. Yes, in the back. And what was your name again? I met you earlier. Pia.
Yeah, if you present a problem, have a solution ready.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
If you present a problem, have a solution ready.
Oh my God, I'm just going to walk like right out the door. Thank you. That is brilliant, and that's exactly kind of like what I had prepared. So let's see if we can get you through it a little bit. Not too sheepishly, though. Absolutely. So let me tell actually a little bit of an anecdote. In the past 5 years, when I finally became a manager, and I was not just a person, an individual contributor, and I was responsible for the performance of my team, right? At that point, I began to kind of encounter a little bit of frustration with, I guess I would say, some disconnects. And coming to a lot of QASIGs and knowing the likes of Michael Bolton and James and John Bach and James Whitaker and a lot of the people who like to talk about quality and testing and a lot of the philosophy around that, you know, I came from that world where the role of testing was really akin to science. You're falsifying testing ideas, and there was a lot of epistemology that was supremely important. I understood. And I still feel like the epistemology, which is the study and the theory of knowledge itself, I do think that's a very big role playing in quality and testing. I've not really changed on that. But when it came to managing a team, I felt like I was getting frustrated with the way that they were going about their jobs, and I realized that I'm kind of frustrated with myself in the past. And so, but over the past couple of years, what I've distilled this down to, and you guys are already kind of beating me to a punch, but really, I think that if I was going to answer the question, what is a tester's job, what is their role, is to provide information. And you hit the nail on the head, actionable information. And I'm sorry, what was your name, Miss? You had already touched on the actionable part, right?
Margaret.
Margaret. Nice to have you here, Margaret. And so,
This is a big problem for me right now.
is it? It's a big problem.
Reporting the right information out.
So actionable information.
Actionable.
And, you know, I'm trying to make these robust theoretical justifications for why you can't ship that goddamn product because there's these problems. And maybe I'm right, or, you know, but that's really not the kind of things that a lot of managers have time for. And so I actually didn't really realize that in the past. And so I do now. So this is kind of the nature of what I wanted to talk about tonight is that stuff is really good and really valuable in order to do your job, but there's kind of a decoupling in, your other job is, yes, to please your boss. We don't want to be yes men, and we don't want them to try and coerce us into only providing good news, right? As Joy pointed out, because then you're incentivized to cover up and to hide failure. Unfortunately, that's one of the, maybe I might as well get to my little thing here. That's that's one of the most toxic atmospheres and environments. I imagine a lot of you guys have probably experienced that, and I certainly have as well. No, you don't want that. And as a manager, I think most good managers, they don't want that. Yes, they want everything to work out nicely. If they know better, they know that things will not always work out nicely. It just doesn't work like that. And so you want to know where the problems are, right? And yeah, I would say that's one of the worst things a manager can do, is to kind of react so negatively that they incentivize their team to not expose failure.
It's like working for Trump.
And so, yeah, that was kind of a big change for me. And
There was,
yeah,
can I
before. Yeah.
interrupt with an anecdote?
We've got time.
When I first went to work for the company I'm currently working for now, I was actually a contractor through Qualitative there, and I was just an individual contributor. And one of the things they asked me to do is to test it on the iPad, the software. And we didn't have a specific iPad version, it was just the web version on the iPad. And I looked at it and it didn't work at all. You really couldn't do anything. It was essentially flat out broken. And then, like the next day, there was this all hands that I got invited to where senior management was talking about how well we worked on the iPad. And I'm like, there's a big disconnect between the person who's actually looking at this and saying that this is seriously broken, because I've written a bunch of bugs, and then
But were they talking about your performance?
What?
I'm sorry. Were they talking about that your performance on testing it went so well, or that the results were so well?
No, they weren't talking about me at all. They didn't even know who I was. They were just claiming that it worked really well, and I had just determined that it hadn't worked, that it didn't work at all. And I'm like, okay, there's a huge disconnect here, and I'm not exactly sure where the problem was, but somebody was hiding the truth from those managers. Either that or the managers chose not to tell the truth in the all hands.
Sometimes the people at the top just assume.
Well, and what I find is that the people that are complaining to the CEO versus the people complaining to me are such different audiences. And so he's sitting here hearing, oh my gosh, you didn't fix this, and my people are saying, we told you so. So it's trying to understand that he's in a bad place, I'm in a bad place, and how can we find that middle ground without stressing him, but making sure that I propose something that he can help me with.
Yeah.
That decoupling that you were talking about between the theory and the application of testing, I think happens a lot when, no offense, but when managers get involved. They're like, this isn't a class, we have timelines and stuff, and that
It is, yeah. But do you think that is a bad thing?
No, I just think that how would you apply that theory back onto it, or is that just not an appropriate time? Is there a time and a place for pontificating?
Well, I think anybody who's going to oversee this kind of work, I think it's imperative that they're going to have some appreciation for what it takes.
Yeah.
That's the first thing, right? And so, but when I'm talking about actionable information, this last item here where I talk about, I was going to go from giving latitude to remedy the problems and having a solution in hand to make that latitude actually happen, which I think actually is a big part of what Agile Scrum process are really kind of all about. And so that's one of the things that I'm getting at is, some people would say, I don't think it's an accurate model, but I do think that it helps people understand very well the big difference between Agile and Waterfall, and they'll say that Waterfall is a fixed set of features, project management triangle, right? Time management. Fixed set of features, whereas the time and the cost are variable, where with Agile, those are the fixed things, and then the features are variable, right? You're going to get whatever you can, and that's one of the reasons why you iterate and then and so on. Which is true. So in an agile environment like that, and that's one of the fundamental, is like the strategic pursuit that's going on. And I think that the tactics flow from that, and tactically at that point, you need to be able to measure your team and their output. A lot of people hate ideas like velocity, but the idea is we just need to know kind of, here's an estimate on how much it's going to take to get done. Here's an estimate on how much the team is capable of doing. Can we actually do that in this short amount of time, or is it going to be 2 releases or 2 sprints or whatever that's going to take? And so, I don't know if I'm answering the question very well.
I don't think I asked it very well.
Yeah, but I feel like I get it. Go
But I
ahead.
think you're feeding into, and I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Kearsley.
Good?
Kearsley?
Curiously, what you said about managers who want to make VP really, so they're trying to make the president happy. But if you were to expose the problems and the risk in a trustworthy way and say by the way here's what the fix could be, it's more acceptable to them, because then they could, at least based on that basic information, they could have an idea in their mind for this is what it takes to fix that problem. And maybe they're more likely to report it. It becomes more palatable. So what exactly Jacob's slide is showing might be the remedy for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So just like to communicate the value of the testing theory and the testing, process, you would want to expose the risks of not using that in an applicable way.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
And again, lack of appreciation or understanding on what it takes in order to do the job. I think that's a bit of a different, that wasn't my intention to talk to that, but I mean, if that's a real thing, that's a real thing. I think some of us have encountered that in the past. It's very unfortunate. And to be honest, I mean, I basically take your side. I don't think that there's any excuse for leadership to not to know and understand.
It's not like a cyber. To give an example, it would be that a person is asking for an answer to one question. And I would say, well, in order for me to find out that answer, I need to run 3 questions through to find...
Sure.
Right.
I understand.
But they only focus on that one question.
Yeah.
Right? Is it a true or false question? It's like, well, there's so much gray area. And
It
so
can be.
how would you still, talking to them in like a leadership way, be like, I understand your time is valuable, and that I'm not just trying to pontificate about the value of testing everything, but to expose those problems of leaving those gaps open.
I might say at that point, it's not too important to be too accurate, right? For example, in the military, I've heard this saying is a decision is better than no decision. Has anybody come across that before? Yeah. And so when I first heard that, I was like, are you effing kidding me? Like, you gotta make sure, because some decisions can be wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, well, inaction can be wrong. And it can be costly.
Error of commission is better than error of omission.
Yeah, and because there's an opportunity to learn, right?
Absolutely.
So we want to just kind of take it, I mean, management, we can't make decisions if we don't have at least some information. And the information is never going to be comprehensive, like who's to say when it's good enough or whatever, but you got to do something. So we just have a few questions to ask. Like, how much work is it going to take? Can it be done? How good enough is it? What is good enough?
James Bach actually wrote an excellent article you can find on the internet on what is good enough.
Oh yes, I love this
It's
good
really
enough
good.
one. Yeah. I pull from that a lot.
But it's
Yes,
also
Margaret.
thing to remind yourself that the reason you got hired is because you are the expert. So you get to, so but your CEO has no idea. So you have to be the voice, and that we'll go into the feminist. But
Right.
as a woman, you have to make sure that you are speaking up and saying that I am the expert. I mean, that's why you're hired.
Right, in fact, and I didn't like dive too deeply into this, but my point here, it says leaders aren't afforded the intimate knowledge or afforded the time
Right,
to,
they don't have.
if you give me a report and it's numbers, quantitative data, oh, okay, well, I can judge numbers, 9's bigger
Right.
than 8, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's qualitative information, if it's non-quantifiable information, which is what a lot of testing is all about,
Mhm.
like, I'm not doing the testing, I'm not elbow deep in this stuff, figuring it all out, and I can say, okay, well, actually, this is pure shit, or this is pure awesomeness, and so I'm reliant on my team to give, and I want them to tell me that kind of stuff, right? But that's the key thing, and the bigger the organization, the more layers they are removed from this stuff, right? But they're next on the line, like they're the neck to choke. Their neck gets choked before our necks get choked. More often than not, right?
But on the other hand, as a leader,
Oh,
when I ask
Terry
my
Boss
team,
just said.
when I ask my team, okay, what's your gut feel on this release?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so I see how many bugs we found, what the passes and failures are and stuff like that. It's like, what do you think? Is it ready? Well, testers are built to think that it's always not ready, it's always bad.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of try to interpret that in the context, though. So
That's true. That's a fantastic point, and I've
Not
been on both sides of this as well, right?
Right. But I want as good information as I can. I want honest information and all the details.
I want their opinion as well,
Right,
So,
Right.
yeah.
Man, I was just talking with Jacob earlier. I solved all those problems. It's not easy, but
That's got it all taken care of. Okay, I think that's pretty much. I think we can move on now. So, you guys have probably all seen dashboards, and this is one of them. This is from Microsoft, Azure DevOps. So the main thing that I'm mostly going to be talking about today is this top row that's called CRM. I'll describe that in a little bit more. But when, as a leader, as a project stakeholder, looking at project information, quantifiable information, it's not the same as the qualifiable information, right? And so we've got some of these traditional metrics that we can use to judge the fitness of the project and the fitness of the product that we're looking to release, right? And so that's one of the first things that pops out, right? Like bug counts. And so if you're going to attempt to quantify the current state of quality, like how would you typically go about doing that? And I think that's one of the first things. It's got this many sub 1s, it's got this many sub 2s, it's 3s and 4s, and we've got that there. But it's always kind of missing something. And so at SMART, actually another QASIG alumni, Scott Gibson, is the one who came up with CRM. So I kind of inherited this, and I had to talk with Scott Gibson, as well as let me give credit to some of the people who helped refine this whole thing, David Woods and Stacy Kaluta at SMART, as well as myself, and I did make some contributions. But what Scott put together was this idea that he wanted to have a number that measured the customer's pain.
Okay.
And so that's effectively what this is. I'm not bringing tonight the proprietary formula for you to be able to put this in place, but I do have some description of it so that conceptually you guys, if you felt compelled to do a thing like this for your team, that you could, come up with your own calculations. It's fairly arbitrary, but arbitrary doesn't mean it's not meaningful. And so I'm going to come back to this slide probably a number of times. And so the CRM is the customer risk number, and this is a way to quantify the qualitative data. Because if you talk about the bug counts, the total number of bugs found, or the total number of test cases run, or whatever, but what does that actually tell you about the quality of the product? And that's one of the reasons why we are fairly reliant, and this, by the way, is no replacement of the tester's assessment necessarily. But what exactly does it tell you in a way that is actionable information for executives or project stakeholders to make, the strategic and tactical decisions that they're on the hook for?
And trustworthy. Sorry, trustworthy.
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 It's like, those testers, they're not very smart.
I mean, I don't want to overstate, you know, the adversarial relation of the relationship. I mean, it kind of depends from org to org and person to person, but.
Have I told you about the Rodney Dangerfield problem? I mean,
I haven't, but let me get through this and then we'll
Sorry.
Yeah, we're doing good. We're only about halfway done. So, quantifying qualitative data. So, customer pain, I told you guys that part. One of the key elements of this, as you look through here, you guys are already familiar with like the Fibonacci scale and stuff, I'm sure, as well. Ours was, the CRN thing was basically in a scale from 1 to 100, but it's not every single value from 1 to 100. Like 1 would be the smallest CRN bug there is, but 200 was our highest, and at the time that I got the snapshot taken, there was no 200 bugs, but there was 100. So it went from 100 to 200, you know, so you've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, 12, 15, and 20, but then by that point, it makes very little difference. You know, if the pain that we're measuring within a single defect is going to be 20 or 21 or 22, right? But it makes a big difference if it's 20 compared to 40, and 40, 50, and then we get up to 80 and 100, and then at that point, like 100 is a really, really big deal, but 200 is like effing stop. Stop everything. This is, you know, an absolute showstopper. And so that's kind of the idea here, is that this is logarithmic and not a linear scale. Whereas if we just have severity 1, 2, 3, and 4, you know, that's linear. And okay, sure, I understand that a 2 is less important than a 1, but how much less, or how much more is a 1 than a 2? And so the calculation that we had at SMART really just incorporated these 3 main factors, and when you combined them, the worse that each one got, the calculation effectively made them escalators, or accelerators, I should say, of each other, so that that number would get logarithmic, right? So we've got the severity, but then we've got the reproducibility and exposure. So the exposure is going to be, you know, how close is it to the core scenarios of the product that they're using? You know, compared to, is it way off in this crazy permutation that not very many people are going to do, and it's really kind of varied, because it can be an extremely serious bug, data loss or crash or whatever, but not very many people. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not important. It's still much more important. That's still going to keep this bug, you know, pretty high on the CRN, but it's not necessarily going to be a 200 compared to something which is arguably less severe, but every single customer is going to do it because it's in the core scenario. All right, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we've got severity and we've got exposure, and then of course we've got reproducibility. And like I said, on working on Android platform and stuff, you know, I'm not like a web technology guy at all. AWS changed everything. Last time I really was touching the web was like 2008 or something. Quite a long time ago. But so I'm aware of, you know, like say Facebook, hundreds and hundreds of millions of users, and so if it only affects 1%, that's huge for them, right? If it affects 1/10 of 1%, that's still huge for them. And so with reproducibility, you know, we basically had like these orders of magnitude from 100th to 1/10 to 1% to 10% to 100. Because for most applications, I think if you've got any customer base at all, anything above 10% of user base this is affecting is basically 100% for all intents and purposes.
Which is exposure, not reproducibility.
Well, so
Right.
reproducibility conceptually could be a component of exposure. Our terminology here and the concept of exposure was how much off the beaten path it is compared to how within a core scenario it might be.
And
So
reproducibility is how many times is it likely to reproduce?
exactly, yeah.
Because when they tell everybody.
So it might be in a core scenario, but it just never happens. We don't know why yet, but it's just like, oh, it's just 1 out of every 100 times, but it's right there in the
Or
core.
maybe it's only certain devices.
Maybe it's only certain devices, yeah. So there's so many components to that. Right. And then, so by being able to distill pain of a single defect into a number here, we're able to make that cumulative, which for release management purposes, I guess I could make that over here, that became very, very beneficial. So as we're looking at this CRM number here, some of the things that I made is, and by the way, like at Smart, we had a stable channel and a beta channel, and I think that's probably common for a lot of the products that you guys are working on as well. And so we had different values, basically a set of red line and a yellow line for the CRM. That if we're at a yellow line, that's the time where I start raising the flag and telling the team, hey, you know, we're getting dangerously close here in terms of quality. We're on the verge. We have to think about cutting scope, trimming features, pushing things back. It's time to start working on some of these bugs that we've been hunting, right? And so red line and yellow line, 800 and 1.2 thousand is what we had for this particular product at the time I took the snapshot. And we're at 800 now, and but we've got this trend line, and we can see that it was greater in the past. There were some products that we worked on, and the CRM was, when I came on board, it was like 5.7 thousand. It was like very, very high. Yes, Margaret.
So my question is, you were, at the beginning, you're talking about software and hardware. So software can do this. Hardware, do you get, are you?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Okay, so, all right, this is software, but it's only, just want to make sure I understand.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
My
It would be
engineers and software,
fantastic.
they're very different.
I mean, even like the tools that we used, the processes, everything just was such an orthogonal fit to the hardware team. It was really like a little deflating. I always kind of had this idea that, well, you know, there's these entirely agnostic quality processes that are going to be applicable to anything that you commercialize and productize, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, today they added consumables to me too, which
Yeah.
is like a whole new thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did. Oh,
So,
that's great.
Yeah, so the idea, we're familiar with, you know, you've got a new product, you may be taking out a lot of quality debt, and you may be willing to live with a lot more quality pain as you go to the market, and then you're going to whittle that down once you deliver some of the core features and everything. And this ends up being like very beneficial to inform that kind of discussion, because I think a lot of product managers are going to be very aware of, you know, that it's really theory, that, you know, how does a feature compare to fixing a bug? And we deal with that on a day-to-day basis, and we deal with that on a planning basis as well. And that's really what ended up being really beneficial for this, as I talk about the release management, that with this yellow line and red line, here as a test manager, I was able to justify and bring to the table I was able to justify myself with data and say, look at this, we're too hot. We are in the red, no more features, we're just going to do a quality release. And actually, I was able to pull that off on more than one occasion, on 2 occasions, on 2 different products. We would say, oh, shit, you know, we've just gone way too far. We're not going to put in a single feature. The next release is going to be all bug fixes. And that's what happened. One of the point, if you guys are going to try and implement something like this yourself, about the idea that it's reflecting the actual pain of the customer, we would go through triage and we won't fix some bugs. Oh, we're just not going to fix. We just don't really care about that. Well, okay, we don't care. I don't care either. We'll just close that. And then they're throwing a fit that the CRM's still high. Like, well, wait a minute. The customer is still going to experience that. They don't stop hitting that bug just because we decide to not fix it, right? So won't fix, external, anything that's punted, like those still count. So just in case that wasn't obvious. So where are we?
Courage, dear.
Courage, dear heart. So I figured this was actually not even part of the plan, and then I'm kind of putting this together, and I kind of anticipated, you know, probably people are going to come to this thinking like, well, I want to know how to please my manager. How do I do the soft skills? What does it take to either become a leader and report up and do all this stuff? And what exactly am I supposed to do? Mostly I was thinking about the other stuff, but I thought I better mention that. And as I thought about it, I think courage is, especially in the line of testing and quality, I think courage is the most tantamount soft skill that I could identify when it comes to reporting information. I mean, this might be bad news, and it might even make you look bad as well. But it's important to expose failure and expose the risk, expose the problems, and let them know. That's not always easy. people said it depends on the person. Sometimes they don't want to hear it, sometimes they do. As a manager, I did my best to try and receive that very well and encourage that. But I think that's one of the most important things that we can do.
Well, you don't fire the messenger, but
Others might, that's true. I think here's probably, when it comes to implementing something like a CRN and a quality report that is conducive to release management, as I just described, this next bullet point I think is probably the most important thing that I can encourage to you. Never report on quality alone. If it's a team, before you go to the executives, get buy-off, get agreement. Say, hey, here's what I'm sending out because, oh my God, are you going to look bad? And is politics going to start when you fire out something and people are like, are you kidding me? That was pure shit, and you're trying to tell them that was really good, right? Troy's example alluded to any of that stuff. And so I just made it common practice. People use Slack, whatever the common channels are of communication for your company, and just let the other project stakeholders know, here's what's coming, here's what they're going to see, all our necks are on the line, and this is how I'm describing it. And I would and that was some of the, the biggest disagreements and the, maybe not too nasty, but some of the most uncomfortable hashings out of details that I've encountered. Yes?
Isn't it better that it comes from you and the customer in the end?
mm-hmm.
Just saying.
From the customer?
Isn't it better that you voice that than a customer does?
No, I agree, yeah. And I mean, quality advocacy or customer advocacy, right? And I do think that a lot of the other project stakeholders, the project managers and the dev managers and whatnot, I think that they're very cognizant of that as well. We all want the whole thing to succeed. We're all basically rowing in the same direction. So I certainly agree with that point. Yeah. Yes, Margaret.
Yeah, and I agree. He doesn't like to be surprised. So the CEO does not want to hear it from the customer before.
Nobody likes a surprise.
Yeah, he wants to have his, as he says, his guns ablazing
Yeah.
and ready to respond. So.
Right. The surprise would be bad. It's right from the customer.
Yeah, he just
If the
wants to
customer
be
finds a
able
bug
to
first.
smooth it over and
Right.
have his spiel ready. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But you tell your reports, there could be problems, give me solutions. Or if you give me a problem, give me a solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Of
course, and that's what, like I say here, like see it as an opportunity. I had my, skin taken a couple of times as a manager. I've had my share of difficult bosses and stuff, and it's kind of an opportunity. Okay, how do you manage up? You learn what their expectations are, and you learn how to deliver towards that. And when it is bad news, you're giving yourself an opportunity to present this as I'm doing you a favor. I'm catching this earlier than the customer or whatever. So there's certainly an opportunity there.
Yeah, one of the things I found though is in managing expectations is to report early, right?
Yeah.
I've been in situations where I know I'm way behind, but I'm telling people above me, I'm going to make it. It's like, I'm just going to put extra time in, and then I didn't make it. And that was really bad.
Oh,
But if I know that, we're behind schedule or things are worse than we thought, it's important to report that up early so that they know that there's potential problems,
Right.
not to just spring it all on them at the end.
That is such a fantastic point. I was so bad at that for so long because it always felt like I was on the verge of having all of the information.
Yep.
And then I could give them a comprehensive report and I wouldn't tell them some shit and like, well, actually, there's this other information. Like, no, that was so frustrating. I didn't want to do it and I would put that off as well. And it ended up just being like the worst thing that you could do because now it's late and then it's still not comprehensive because there's always more information. It's just somehow that's always going to be the case. And so another thing that actually to kind of touch on that is there's kind of this, for lack of a better term, like boy that cried wolf risk. I don't think that's the right thing. It's not boy that cried wolf, but I have learned that if you escalate minutia too much, then
That's more the chicken little sky
It's
is
kind of
falling.
yeah. So you want to be aware not to do
Right.
that. Like if you're going to escalate frequently, you're going to want to have a sense for when it's important enough that they actually care and when it doesn't. And that's not like you don't want to be a yes man, because if you think it's important, then go ahead and do it. But be flexible and recognize that maybe your take on what's important isn't. I mean, at least if the organization doesn't care, doesn't see it the way that you do, you don't necessarily have to change your view, but when it comes to the reporting up and doing them the service of exposing the risk and and reporting all the problems, then just try to align to what they care and what they do. Yes, Ken.
So, I kind of see what you're saying is that I had a similar experiences, what you're kind of saying in my current work and my previous work. Is I'm just a QA person who's assigned for technology, things, project. But from the get-go, there's no information to start with, no data, no information to start from, and, project just started, Deborah is pretty much new to that group, so he's still learning how to be coding on this environment. But business person, who's business owner is wants this thing to happen in 3 months. Well, from QA point of view, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I learned that in a hard. I learned it in a hard way, but I did it in a more concise way because I was kind of known as a crying wolf because I find a lot of things bad not working, and I had to kind of come up with a report. As a single tester, bottom tester, you go up to your managers and managers. But on these cases, what happened is that there isn't time for it. So basically, I had to bite the bullet to do everything that the other people supposed to be doing to help me, but I had to do that, come up with the data, come up with the scenario, and also come up with the solution or remedy that you're talking about, actionable things that what we can do. So it's buy off from the people who you're working with, the dev and the businesses and all the managers that you work with in the project. So, whether you like it or not, you're gonna have to do those kind of stuff later on as you start working towards more reporting skills you have to work with. And you can be crying wolf, but you can't be a crying wolf that everybody will trust you because they'll say, hey, Ken is crying wolf on this project and we need to take a look at it. And the business and the upper management will keep your trust of it because you did something in the previous that actually prevent the whole major stuff to go broken. You prevent it. It wasn't bad, the business didn't like it, but they did buy off of based on the solution I gave to them and say, hey, we need to delay this about another release or maybe 2 releases so we can work on it to fix that core issue before we release it to impact others. Right? So
let me make sure I understand, Ken. So are you describing a situation where you estimated how much time it would take to get something done, turned out to require more time, but the estimate was received as a commitment?
estimate was received as a commitment before it even reached a QA.
Yeah.
And the QA got out of hand of it and came out to be that my estimation of it is way off. Besides that, and the estimation was done by the businesses where the thinking we're going to assign the top people to work on it, which end up being handed off to the newbies.
Yeah.
Because the only person who's actually a senior on the entire group was me.
I see.
And I end up writing everything from basically negotiating solutions to my manager on the QA side, and I had to talk with the business owner that we were actually presenting things and getting buy-off, and also their leader. So in that case, like a statistic that you gave me numbers, here's how many bugs we have, what's the impact we can have when we.
So you've got capability variance there across the team.
Yeah, we just, that was the first time thing I did, and I had to learn quickly to come up with a solution. So I had that hand-hold helping from my manager in a way, and also a co-worker who was able to help me get on track.
I mean, accolades to you to rise to the occasion and having the innovation to get it done and stuff. I think that sometimes there's a time to just kind of raise the flag a second time or maybe a third time. Like, well, look, this is, it's not, I thought it was 2 days, it is 4, it's a month. And no, I'm sorry, it's a month, either it's a month or I'm wrong, there's nothing I can do, but back to the drawing board, make sure that you guys understand this, you know. It's a soft skill, it kind of depends on the people and stuff. Were you gonna weigh in as well, Troy?
Well, I just had a quick point to make about Crangle Office. So sometimes it's really hard to tell how bad a bug is going to be once it gets out into the wild. And there's been occasions where I've argued really hard that we should fix something because I think it's terrible. And we end up not fixing it and none of the customers ever complain. You know, so it's like, all right. And then there's been some things that we've known about that we don't think are a big deal, and they get out there, and suddenly the tech support lines are going off the hook because everybody's unhappy about it. So I think it's really important to have actual customers in a beta group that you can run things by and get real customer feedback. Sometimes in QA you try to put that customer hat on, but you're kind of too much in the weeds to really see it from their point of view.
That's very interesting to Ken's situation, because I think we all naturally kind of, there's the lessons learned, and when it's too high or too low or whatever, and you start to kind of calibrate yourself to expectations or to reality, and you kind of learn that, okay, my previous take was really not all that much.
Well, in our case, it's more in the actual real public customer deal. In my case, it's more in the internal business deal. So in order to kind of come up with a solution, is that you need to understand what this project is, what's the impact of business on.
Sure.
Basically, it's going to be you need to understand what this business owner, or basically business owner equal customer, in my case, is one of this project to be out, and also what dollar, basically the dollar sign money involvement is. That's a kind of completely different field from the QA point of QA, because as a QA, you are looking for issues or blockage or something that need to be catched before it comes on releases, right? So I have to wear a different hat as of being QA. I have to be being, not really the dev, but I have to wear like a business solution. I have to really think hard to from their point of view why they are pushing this timeline.
Yeah.
Constantly as a leadership, from the leadership being asked, was this that I learned, is that can we cut down the QA time? Can we shorten it? Can we cut features? What we can to do to meet our timeline of the releasing it in the given time frame. And I understand from your point of view that that's the kind of, it's as a people soft skill that you need to work on, courage and near the heart. It's you need to give them a consensus that I understand from point of view, on your point of view, that we're having an issue and we need to release this, but please have my point of view to kind of explain it.
Sure.
So
I understand.
it's a negotiation skill.
Right, negotiation skill. And I mean, if they're not given it enough time, that's kind of that's an undisciplined process management approach. That's kind of a whole separate topic. But as you're touching on just the issue of estimates, like that's a really big part of Agile, having an entire team take the time to calibrate their estimates on things, and when it's too high or when it's too low, either at an individual basis or collectively from sprint to sprint, then that's one of the reasons that we track a lot of this information here. At the third row here, we've got a lot of sprint information and velocity, and as when the team gets into that and it's just not working out, and you've got all this massive pain when it comes to releasing, or you've got to punt features or punt really important bugs or whatever, or slip the schedule if it comes to that, whatever the case may be, and then usually that constitutes a hard discussion of, okay, our estimations are way off, what do we do? Or the estimations were right but people didn't listen, and then what do you do? And that's really, I think, usually the time to bring that up.
Yeah, but it sounds like he's describing the situation that I've been in for a long time, and I've been in more than one company, in that it's the senior executives who decide on the schedule. And I worked on one project that the executives thought, hey, this is going to be a really easy thing to do. We're going to take something that someone else has developed in Europe, we're going to rebrand it, and we're going to sell it here. They called it Project Blackjack because they thought it would take 21 weeks. I got hired 6 months into it.
Of course, yeah.
So, but, and, this is a problem that I've seen in multiple companies where the dictate comes down from above.
Yeah.
We need all these features, and we need it by this time, and we can go ahead and, do all the estimates we want, but it turns out that they don't care, they want to get it done. So what you have to do is the best you can, and sometimes you ship a product that's not the quality you want it to be. So.
Absolutely. And when it gets up to like executive and officer level, it's not what's going on there. But, there's project stakeholders and then there's org stakeholders. And so I'll finish with this as a really good thing. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, but he's kind of a famous, like, angry intellectual, and he loves taking down other academics and stuff. And so he's written a couple of books, like Black Swan, but one of the more recent ones, not his most recent one, is really interesting. It's called Skin in the Game. And he makes a lot, he's like a mathematician, so that's what is, to me, so fascinating. He's basically making mathematical formulations for all of this kind of stuff that to me seems non-quantifiable, right? And but with the skin of the game, a lot of the points that he makes, I mean, the project stakeholders, that's the necks that get choked if the project doesn't do well, and so they're heavily invested on whether or not that release date is accurate. And if they're setting the date, they may be wrong. It may, it may be off or whatever. Yes, it's ultimately always going to be kind of arbitrary and stuff, but at least there's skin in the game because they're invested in the success of it. And it's not to say that the executives are not invested in the success of it, but they have no skin in the game. They're not invested in the way that their net gets choked if it goes wrong, right? I mean, ultimately, the credit as well as the pressure and the consequence, that does all roll up, and that's why we see CEOs get fired and all that kind of stuff. But skin in the game, so excellent point. Anyway, that's pretty much all I've got. I know that we're about out of time. These slides will get posted. There's my contact info if you guys want to know any more information about this stuff. And with that, I'm done. Is there any other comments or questions? Margaret?
I would say I've been a manager of people and now I'm a manager of a program. So what are some of the advantages that you have enjoyed moving into project management?
The advantages? So, what I like to tell people, like when I'm been interviewing for a job, I like to say something like, the thing that gets me out of bed, the thing that really drives me is I like to be part of the critical decisions that ultimately affect the success or failure of a product. I think I know it all, and I know that I know I don't know it all, but I think I know it all. If that makes any sense, I always think that I can make a better decision. I always think that my opinions are right, and the executives are wrong, or whatever. And I always wanted to be a part of that, so I love it. But I don't want it to be unilateral either. That's not my way, and so. But I just always like to be right there, and so that's. I mean, it happens at the leadership level, and so I. My hand ring, and that's kind of where I had to be. So that's kind of my answer.
How would you? I'm sorry.
It's not fifth grade.
How would you because you're talking about like customers' pain and how it can be like quantified. Now I'm kind of thinking like maybe my manager is like, not him, looking at like those numbers and is trying to take what I'm saying and put it into those quantitative numbers. What is a good way for an individual contributor to not like raise a bunch of flags and cause like a bunch of like, oh, it's failing, the sky is falling, but be like, you have a weak spot. And if you keep ignoring it, it's just gonna metastasize.
Yeah, excellent question. I don't know if I've got a good answer, but I do have, I think, a good question. So as your role, I presume that you would agree that you are basically a surrogate user, you are a advocate for the user, right?
Yeah,
their pain or pleasure or whatever
is mine.
Is yours. You're sort of a proxy through which the company is able to gauge the fitness of the product. Okay, so have you spoken with customers? Has the company sent you out onto customer site visits and gained a sense for really what the real pain and what the real pleasure is?
I would say that there's definitely a connect between like the service side and testing to like take customer complaints, but there is a lot of process between my leadership and that customer. There's, by the time it gets to quote unquote my desk, there's like 3 handoffs that have already happened. So it's like at a very elevated level, and there's a lot of like, the world is on fire, okay now it's not, okay now it is, okay now it's not. And a lot of like, I need an answer from you, yes or no, is it good, is it not good, when it's so gray. And it's hard to take those quantitative thoughts and be like, yes it's bad, and yes it's on fire, but, and you can't punt this needs to happen, but it's more important or less important than this. How would you communicate a quantitative problem into a qualitative report? It's a very easy question for you to answer, I'm sure.
There's so many layers because she's so good, so we don't want anyone to like bother her. It's kind of like really critical.
But then when it becomes critical, it's like,
right.
well, it's like the customer's pain. What kind of pain is it?
Real
Right?
pain,
Is it
right?
terminal pain that's going to kill the customer? Or is it like, oh, well, they can deal with a hangnail every once in a while? It's very acute.
But when they stop paying, it
experience.
turns into our pain.
Exactly.
You lose
So
a customer.
one of the things that, and I think you alluded to this on, or you mentioned this on one of your first slides, is you're not just saying how bad is the problem, or we found this problem, we think it's bad, or whatever. A big part, because there's no way you can test everything, so a big
Right.
part of what you communicate is, this is what we know, this is what we've tested, this is what we haven't tested because of X, Y, Z.
Right.
This is how bad we think the problem is right now. Do you want us to spend more time discovering
Yeah.
X, Y, Z?
Or should we be pointing
Or
down?
should we move to the next crisis?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people focus on the specific problem, and I think it's important to say, this is what we've done, this is
Yeah.
what we know is working.
Okay.
And
Instead of being like, well, we think it could be this and this from what we have here, just be like, this is what we have. This is what we know, this is what we don't know.
right, yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
gets back to one of the things you said early on that really struck me. In fact, we had this conversation a day or two ago, is that, the role of tests is to provide information,
Yeah.
right? We're not the gatekeepers, we're not the ones that are gonna say, no, you cannot ship this. It takes so much pressure off of us when we can just say, we're providing the information, and then the team as a whole has to decide if it's worth going forward with these risks.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah,
theory that
amen.
you were talking about earlier, that coupling of theory, right, where it's like, yes, my job is to provide the data, but when someone asks me, well, what does it mean? Do I just stand there and just be, that's not my
Right,
job.
and that's the difficult part,
It
is
is
not
a
only
difficult part.
providing the information, but providing enough, make some
Actionable.
interpretation, context,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and again, like you said, Joy, it's not just what we do know, it's what we don't know. How much haven't we covered? What, what are the risks that could still be out there?
Assessment.
Well, it's like someone
that's where it
wanted
gets
For sure.
like, how much
Let me,
percentage have we
close.
tested? It's like an infinity percentage, because you can test forever.
So, thank you. I really love, and I think it's successfully happened almost every time. No, it's okay. I love when it turns into more of a discussion that I get to sit up here, but I'm leading, but really where we're all contributing, and so it's a lot of fun, and I really appreciate that. So that's all I've got, and we can continue to chat for a little while, but definitely thank you all for coming. Thank you for giving your time.
Great time.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head.
All right.
And to back up a lot of the things that you were saying, I can say that the way it goes hand in hand with everything you just said. The way we hire here at Corda is we find the brightest people with the best skills in what they need to do. But I'll tell you, those are table stakes. What we really hire for is intuition, creativity, and confidence. And so if you can spot a problem and you have the creativity to solve it and you have the confidence to just do it, just do it. Don't wait for permission, and that's one thing that we really interview for. Because I don't want to be the bottleneck.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody waiting for me to say, go ahead. Just do it. Because you're the most qualified, whoever it is the most qualified person in that position to make that call.